I think this section's going to be review, but still worth kind of checking out, because if you start out not getting the first section, then the other ones all kind of build on it. But the first few sections, at least, are all just kind of these little steps where we talk about ratios, and then what's a rate, and then what's a proportion. But they all come back to what ratios are. So ratios, they compare two quantities. That's kind of the key. Put a little star by it for emphasis, but it compares two quantities. So in other words, if we were to talk about like a guy-girl ratio and look around the room, so in a room we have 5 guys and 8 girls. So you could write your ratio this way. You could say 5 to 8. That there's 5 guys in the room, there's 8 girls in the room. Other ways that we could write ratios, though, would be 5 and an 8. And what sometimes do they replace the word 2 with? A colon. Nice. So you could have like a 5 to 8 ratio this way. So if they were to say the guy-girl ratio in math class, 5 to 8. Another way they could write it would be as a fraction. Oops, wrote that wrong. So it should be 5 divided by 8. So as you read it, you do it the same exact way, that the 5 comes first, would be in the numerator, 8 comes second, and be in the denominator. Fair enough? If you're to talk about teacher-student ratio in the middle school, I'm just going to kind of make it up and say we have like a 5 to 90 ratio. And that's not entirely true, but it helps me do what I want to do with this. So I'm going to say a 5 to 90. Which another way you could write that without the 2 would be 5 colon 90. And the last way you could write it would be a
5 over 90.
Nice, 5 over 90 as a fraction, something like that. But when we have those, if we have, sure, 1 sec. So if we have those, you could write it that way, but what would be a better way to write it? If you're talking like a college, you could go with like college is going to have a lot bigger numbers, so a 200 to a 12,000 ratio, but what really is the teacher-student ratio then in something like that? So instead, we could take this fraction, and when we have fractions, often we try to reduce them, right? That the 5 and the 90, we could divide both of those by 5, agreed? And when we do that, that gives us a much nicer ratio to look at. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 90 divided by 5 is a little harder, 18. But if we were to say we have a 1 to 18 ratio, that makes a little bit more sense. So for every 1 teacher, you're going to have 18 students. And we could write it the other ways as well. Instead of 5 colon 90, we could write 1 colon 18 or a 1 to 18. But if you have a ratio, if you can reduce it, that's going to be best. So maybe I'll just write that out and say best to reduce when possible. And like I was starting to say with like a college thing, if you have a much bigger school, it makes a lot more sense. Often when you look up colleges online, they'll give you like professor to student ratio and stuff like that. That's all for section 1.
Oh, fun.
Questions at all?